house needs painting, grass needs mowing, where's he at?
Hi, this is Hank. Sorry I missed your call. Leave me your name and your number and I'll get back to you.
He's gone fishing.
Hello and welcome to Hank Parker Off the Water.
Nope. Off the water with Hank Parker.
All right.
Every time.
All right. With my beautiful co-host and granddaughter, Sarah Beth.
Hello.
Sarah Beth, how did we come up with Off the Water with Hank Parker? Come on.
Well, your TV show is called On the Water with Hank Parker, so Off the Water with Hank Parker.
Because we're not on the water.
We're not.
We're talking about it, though.
We are. You wish you were. Wish you were on the water.
Okay, so let's go. Off the Water with Hank Parker.
That's a lot better.
How about Hank Parker Off the Water? Hank Parker's off the water. What's
Hank Parker is off. That's true.
Off the
It's
rock.
whatever. It's all for branding.
Hey, we're going to have a great show today, I think. I hope you feel the same way as I do. Last week, we talked about the pioneers of the sport, the people that were so selfless to lend their credibility to Ray Scott to help build the sport. This week, we're going to talk about how the sport shaped the industry. The whole fishing tackle industry has been shaken up and rearranged by the influence of the professional bass fishermen. We're going to talk about the early days. We're going to come up to current time. We're going to talk about the companies that got on board, the companies that didn't get on board, what transpired, and the rearranging of how to market. Can we use the influence of outdoor riders as we have done in the past, or should we make a shift and start endorsing professional bass fishermen? Who is going to carry the most weight in the marketplace? Who is the most authoritative? Who's going to help sell more lures, rods and reels, boats and motors, and all the above. So it's going to be interesting. What's your take on the industry today, and what do you think about all the rods and reels and choices? I know you go into the Bass Pro Shop and you look
too
at
many.
Too many.
Too many. Pink Zebco. Sign me up.
Pink Zebco will do you in. Well, I see
Sure
you got
will.
a pink Yeti, so
I do.
it would match your pink Zebco.
It would. Get a
So
pink
Sarah Beth feels like there's too many choices. I do too. I go to Bass Pro Shop. I come out a lot of times bewildered. There's so many opportunities out there and so many great fishing lures, and I want them all. I really do. I love it. I don't think you can have too many. But you know what is incredible? You can have 60 million. And if you're looking for the one arc crankbait that is going to run 2 foot deep with a purple stripe and a red eye, if they don't have that particular one, you come out disappointed. Man, they don't have nothing. I can't believe I can't find nothing.
Can't find nothing nowadays.
I'd hate to be Johnny Morris at Bass Pro. I bet people complain. My Lord, have mercy. The options are unlimited. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how the sport of organized bass fishing has benefited the average weekend warrior, has benefited the casual fisherman, has rearranged lure design, rod design, line design, techniques, methods, boats, motors. Man, the organized BASS shuffled the cards and changed everything.
Sure seems like it.
It is a fact, and we're going to talk about it today. So let's get started about, I guess, about 1968 when Ray started forming BASS. The norm was at that time the lure companies that were marketing and were pretty aggressive trying to sell lures and even rods and reels did that by using outdoor riders. Every part of the country would have a sports page. In Charlotte, North Carolina, where I grew up, it was Tom Higgins, outdoor rider, and he would have a column in the Sunday paper on a certain lake in our area, what's going on, and then throughout the week they'd give a little fishing report. So the method of marketing in those days was to get a guy like Tom, furnish him with the rods and reels, give him a wide assortment of lures, and let him write about it in the newspaper. And that was their way of marketing. Well, then here comes BASS, here comes professional anglers. So now all of a sudden you got a guy like Bill Dance that's saying, hey, I'm going to tell you, this is the bait you need. You need this right here. If you had this bait right here, the bass are going to come out with their fins up. So you're going to buy that bait. And so it was a changing of guards. All of a sudden, there was more impact being made by professional anglers than was being made by outdoor riders. Mm-hmm. You think that's pretty neat?
I think that is pretty neat.
Now, what were you doing back in 1968?
I wasn't even born yet, man. It's like dinosaur age.
Dinosaur.
Call you boomer.
Dinosaur age. Oh, I was telling Sarah Beth about something, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and I was telling her about it. She said, oh, my Lord, Papa, that was back in the olden times. That was back in the 90s.
Back in the 90s. I think you were talking more like the 70s, isn't it? The old times.
Oh, Lord have mercy. Back in the 90s, you told me. The 90s is current. I mean, we're only 30 years away from the 90s.
Yeah.
So anyway, when all that took place, it was a lot of people that got on board, a lot of companies, and a lot that didn't. And the ones that didn't, I ended up going to work with Berkeley in 1978. Ooh. 1978 is when I switched from DuPont Stren fishing line to Berkeley Trilene. And I will have to stop and say it was one of the best things I ever did. One of the best things I ever did for my career, not from a monetary standpoint, but not breaking line and losing fish. Oh, yeah. My goodness, did I ever have a tough time. Stren came out with a new fishing line about 1977, 78, called New Stren, and it had a wax in it. And that wax, it was, all they did, basically, Stren's line was nylon 6, which is a very common nylon, and they extruded it and made Stren out of it. And then they put this wax coating on it to make it more pliable. And in doing that, there were places where the monofilament wasn't joined together, and so it had bad spots in it. Mm. And man, you break a line, I had so much problem. And I switched to Trilene for that reason, and it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. It's the greatest fishing line, a great company to work for, and a lot of history. But they got burned. They got burned. Burke Bedell, who was a senator from Iowa, was at the helm of Berkeley. He started Berkeley by hand-tying little fishing ties fishing flies when he was like 10, 12, 15 years old, high school kid. And he would sell those fishing flies, and that finally gravitated and progressed, and he started selling catgut fishing line leader, and that ended up going into extruding fishing line, and that's where Trilene was birthed. And they made an incredible fishing line and gained a lot of notoriety in the 60s. And they were probably the #1 premium fishing line company in America. Mm. And then Bass came along, and DuPont joined forces with Bass with Stren. And then all of a sudden, because of the influence of Bass, Stren literally took over market share from Berkeley to the point that Berkeley went from about 70% market share of premium monofilament fishing line down to, it probably got as low as 25 or 30%. And Stren became the 65%, and then all the rest of the companies combined got made up the other 5%. So Stren dominated because of their alignment with Bass. Everybody took note of that. You didn't have to be a very smart person in the business world, the outdoor world of marketing to see that because DuPont Stren hooked up with Bass, it influenced their sales to the point that they buried Berkeley. And matter of fact, Burke Bedell told Tom, was Tom Bedell. Burke's son was he was in Washington, D.C., and he was a lobbyist. And very aggressive, very smart guy, but very aggressive. And Tom was having the time of his life. He was down there stirring up stuff, making a lot of money as a lobbyist. And his dad, Burke, called him and said, "Tom, this company's in big trouble. If you're going to save our company, you're going to have to do it. I can't do it. I don't have time. I'm working in Congress, and if our company is going to survive, it's going to be through your efforts." So Tom Bedell left Washington, D.C., went back to Spirit Lake, Iowa, and he started looking at what has gone wrong. And immediately he identified what went wrong is his dad's failure to align himself with BASS. And his competitor, DuPont, had done that and just blown them away. So Tom Bedell, if I would have been a gunslinger, I would want Tom Bedell on my side.
Yeah.
That rascal was a gunslinger, buddy. He wasn't scared of nothing or nobody. And he got in there with Bass, and he started advertising, he started marketing, he started doing some radical things. We'll pick up on that and talk about that in just a little while further down the line. But I want to talk about some other companies, but just hold that right where we are. Tom Bedell came back. He realigned the company based on using bass fishermen and getting involved with BASS, opposed to the old methodology that his dad stayed with, and that was marketing through outdoor riders. They got kind of caught and left behind because the bass fishermen took over their influence. Now, let me, before we go too much further, and talk about the bass fishermen and their role and how they dominated marketing for all the different fishing lure companies in the country. The way you get sponsorship, I go to these high schools, and again, this is where Huckleberry was birthed, because all these kids, the number one, and the coaches as well, the question was, how do we get sponsorship? Well, you're not asking for sponsorship. First of all, here's how you get sponsorship. A sponsor comes on board with a personality that has the horsepower and the influence on the consuming public. When he says, try this, you're going to try it. He says, buy this, you're going to buy it. He's got enough influence that whatever they pay you is justified because he creates enough market to offset what his cost is. If you read the story of Nike and back to Michael Jordan and how much money they paid Michael Jordan in order to gain market share, but his influence had enough power to offset all that money they borrowed to pay him for his endorsement. And that's sponsorship. Sponsorship works when I, Hank Parker, have enough influence on the consumer when I say, try this Lose Rod and Reel, you try it. Or buy this X-Zone Deception Worm, you buy it. And so when you pay me a certain amount of money, then talk about your product, I have enough influence on the consumer that they buy that product. That's the way sponsorship works. A high school fishing team is not in a position to have influence on the consuming public, especially on a national basis, to influence sales.
That makes sense, yeah.
So this word sponsorship's blown all out of proportion. Let's get a defined definition of sponsorship, and that's what it is when you have enough notoriety that when you endorse something, it creates enough sales to offset what you're asking for in payment from the company.
Right.
So all these high school kids that were asking for sponsorship, they weren't asking for sponsorship. They was asking for money. They're asking for a handout. Have this company give me this, have this company. And a lot of that goes back to all this entitlement attitude of younger generation. And a lot of that's been created by our own government, where they're handing out money for people that haven't done anything. I've always thought a reward came with effort and work. And at the end of the day, if you put in your 8 hours, and however much your paycheck was reflected on how much work you put
did.
in.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're totally right. We live in a world where people expect handouts, but at the end of the day, you have to run a business. A business is a business, whether it's a big corporation. People think, oh, well, they have tons of money and they can just hand out whatever. That might be true, but if they start doing that for everybody, then what are they left with? That's a poor business decision. You have to show your worth.
Well, and that was one of the battles that a lot of young anglers fought, is because they were so infatuated with the sport, they were so happy to be involved in the sport, they would work for almost nothing. And it doesn't matter whether you're an athlete or what kind of business you're in, you have to separate that, and you have to run a business as a business or you'll be broke. You can't go around fishing tournaments and staying in hotels and buying gas and buying boats and motors and not being able to charge a fee to your sponsors, or not have sponsors. But you won't survive because everything goes out and nothing comes in. You got to run it as a business. You don't want to. You want it to be a laid-back sport. Hey, I'm getting up and going fishing. But the problem is you got to have money to put fuel in that boat. So you've got to be able to run a fishing, as an angler, you are your own commodity. You don't have a product. You can't box something up and sell it. You are selling yourself. And so, one, you've got to be credible. You've got to work, and you've got to be honest, and you've got to be of value to a sponsor, to a corporation that you're asking to sponsor. You've got to be of value. And I always like to sell myself short, because that's job security. If I'm delivering more than they expect of me, then I don't have to worry about renewing my contract. But if I'm not delivering, I'm underdeveloping, they're overpaying me, then next year I'm going to have a tough time negotiating a new contract.
Right.
So I always like to over-deliver. I like to promise I could do this, knowing I could do a lot more than the bare minimum that I promised to do. And but the way you make it in any sport or any business, as I say, you're your own commodity. So you got to sell yourself, and you got to package, you got to put a fair price on it, or you won't make it. You can't. There's too much expense involved, and so that's the way professional angling works. But from a company's perspective, from a Bagley, Jim Bagley, who was a unique person. I love Jim Bagley, very, very nice man. Jim Bagley recognized early on how much influence. He hooked up with Dance. He hooked up with a lot of people. He worked with Ricky Clun. Jim worked with a lot of different pros. He recognized right off the bat how much influence these guys had. And he jumped in there and signed the deal with a lot of guys. And he used that professional influence to help sell baits, but he also used that professional influence in design. He would call these guys in. I know Clun would go down, and I know Dance sat in on a lot of different meetings, and they would talk about how can we make a bait to do this, or we need a bait to do that, or we need to change this particular bait. I think this Bangalore could be a better bait if we had it in 3 sizes and stuff like that. And it was the vision of the professional angler that taught these companies how to make baits that fits a need. Right. Before that, bass lures were designed pretty basic elementary design. Ooh, this looks good. Ooh, this vibrates good. Ooh, this runs good. And so they would make that bait because it was something that appealed to the designer, and it would perform to the designer's expectation. But when the pro fishermen came along, they said, no, we need a bait that goes 2.5 feet deep. We need a bait we can pull over the top of that milfoil. Oh, no, no, no. We need that bait in a 3-inch model. We need that bait in a 6-inch model. We need that bait in a 9-inch model. We need that bait that when the fish are aggressive in the month of May and they come off the beds, and we need that bait to dive 12 feet, 15 feet deep.
Right.
So everything changed. Bagley recognized that, and he became a winner. His company became one of the premier companies in all of America, and they made their baits out of balsa wood, and they made unique design baits. Mm-hmm. Completely different than before bass fishing became popular.
Right.
It rearranged everything. So now marketing has changed. Lure design has changed. Everything is actually getting better because you've got more selection. You've got more tools to do a job. I tell people all the time, and I know I've probably run this in the ground. I've probably said this a few times on my podcast. But a fishing lure is the same thing as a tool to a mechanic. A fishing lure is something to do a job. If you've got fish 12 feet deep on a ledge and you need a crankbait that'll run 12 feet deep. You need a bait that'll get down there to them. A bait that runs 2 or 3 feet deep is not going to do the job.
No.
A top water bait's not going to do a job. And you don't necessarily need a bait that runs 25 feet deep if the fish are 12 feet deep. Right. Because you want that bait to be more horizontal than straight up and down vertical. It dives too deep. So the right running depth will make a difference in sparking strikes and catching fish. So lure design is essential. And bass fishing on a professional level, all these guys recognize the need for a tool to do a job. So they would go back to Jim Bagley, or they go back to Linder, Al's brother, Ron Linder. I couldn't think, I'm getting old. Ron Linder started a company called Lindy Little Joe. And Lindy, I don't even think it was Lindy Little Joe. I think when Ron Linder started Lindy, it was Lindy Manufacturing Company. And but he would take input from Al was going around the country guiding then. He would guide in Minnesota in the summertime, and he would go down to Sam Rayburn in Texas and guide. And he was trying to figure out all these southern lakes, and he was taking all that input back to Ron, and they were designing baits to do a job on all these different lakes based on a need. Mm-hmm. Based on a need. All before lures had been designed out of, boy, this looks good, or wonder if we made one like, I believe bass eat frogs, let's make a frog. Bass eat turtles, let's make a turtle. Right. Bass eat minnows, let's make a little minnow bait. So they would design baits based on what everybody thought would look good and appeal, rather than building them as a tool to do a job.
Right.
So when organized bass fishing came along, it all changed. Now lures are being influenced heavily by people that see a need. Mm-hmm. And that hasn't changed up until this day. It rearranged everything. And of course it created a lot of opportunity. It created a lot of saturation. It grew the opportunity for Johnny Morris at Bass Pro Shops. It grew the opportunity for all these other mom and pop fishing stores. Now, man, you had a wall full of artificial baits. Maybe 3 or 4 walls full of artificial baits. And it kept growing and it kept growing and it kept growing. And it's where you said today, it's too many.
Right.
You go to Bass Pro Shops and you're overwhelmed. But if you will stop and look at that as a tool, you'll realize that there's 50 different brands of the same tool. So you don't need to have everything, although I like that. You don't need to have everything that's in the store. Right. You just need to get the right tool. And so a lot of duplicates are out there, and you might like this brand or you might like that brand, but the lures are basically the same, just bear a different brand. So, right. But that is what bass fishing has done to the lure world. It has done the same thing in the rod and reel company. I work with Lew's. I'm now involved in a project. If you take an electronic catalog of Lew's and you open it up or you hit the keyboard, you can tell I'm old school. I'm gonna open it up like a magazine. No, you hit the keyboard and you pull up rods and you start to look. It'll tell you it's IM8. It'll tell you it's IM6. It'll tell you it's 6 foot long. It'll tell you it's 7 foot long. It'll tell you it's a medium. It'll tell you it's a medium light. It'll tell you it's a medium heavy. It can't tell you the whole story. And so when you look, then you turn the page or you computer, whatever you do, you shuffle, look at somebody else's website, and you see their rods. Well, they got IM6, they got IM8, they got stainless guides, they've got carbide guides, they got the same things. They got a medium heavy, they got a medium light, they've got a 7 foot. How do you differentiate? How do you differentiate and separate which of all the rods based on a computer screen or a magazine or a catalog, how do you discern which is the perfect rod for what you need?
Right. Now, if it was me, I'd be going straight to the review section underneath. Word of mouth, I feel like, goes more than anything. I think that's completely true what you were saying earlier with brands finding somebody who can properly represent their product. Because I feel like that is such a huge thing. Because for me, if I'm just seeing something scrolling by, I'm like, okay, that's cool. But what really sells me on it is seeing somebody who is trusted in the community promoting that product. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah,
Yep.
that might be.
And that's exactly where we're going with this catalog with Lew's. I just did a show a week or two ago with Mr. Crappie, Wally Marshall. Wally's got his own line of rods, reels, fishing lures. He's got it all, and it all evolves around crappie fishing or crappie fishing or speck fishing or sockeye, whatever you say. I'm so uncomfortable when it says crappie because I grew up all my life saying crappie, and everybody says, you can't say that on TV. Well, that's all I know, so
Sure did.
I really feel weird. Everybody thinks, man, you're a Yankee. You talk about crappie fishing. Well, I'm not ashamed of being a Yankee. I love New York. It's one of my favorite places to fish. I'm not talking about New York City, and I'm not talking about their politics. I am definitely not into that. So, but as far as their fishery and the people, you go to upper state New York, and they're no different than the people in Charleston, South Carolina. But now you go to New York City, that's a different world. So I want to clarify that I don't mind being called a Yankee if you call me upper New York state, but I feel weird when I say crappie. Right. But anyway, I did a fishing show with Wally Marshall, Mr. Crappie. And he's got all these new rods and reels and design. Well, first of all, I didn't have enough experience at crappie fishing to really appreciate some of the designs and the products that he has. Now, Lew's makes their rods and reels for Mr. Crappie under that brand. Well, he's got a 12-foot rod that is light, balanced, and easy to handle, doesn't kill your shoulder, and you can reach out there, and if you're fishing around a cypress tree with a 32nd ounce jig, you can let that thing down in the roots of that cypress tree, and you can just shake it and lift it right out and avoid hanging up.
I need that.
Yeah, well, if you took a shorter rod and you cast it over there, then you drag it back, you're hung up, you can't get it loose. You got to go get it. But with that longer rod. So I recognized that about 7 or 8 years ago when I went to Texas and was fishing shallow water spawning crappie. And I realized how important that is. And that was a Wally Marshall Lew's rod that I was blown away with. At the end of the day, I was not worn out, and I had caught so many fish, and I didn't hang up. Well, now Wally's got a whole line of rods, and I'm going to stay with rods. I won't talk about reels at the moment. A whole line of rods that are specialized for the purpose of crappie and crappie fishing. And they will make your experience better. They'll make your abilities to catch and to cast more enjoyable and better. You can actually catch more fish. To me, it was so obvious because I am not a seasoned crappie fisherman. I don't do that often. So Wally was able to school me, and I could appreciate real quick how much better his rods and reels that were designed for that specific purpose opposed to my bass rods and reels.
Right.
So it really was a lesson for me. Well, it's the same thing for the average angler. Everybody can't go fishing with Wally. But I can go fishing with Wally, and I can demonstrate his rods and reels and allow him to demonstrate them to me and put that on video, and then you can understand and say, oh, I get it. That would be a better rod. Okay. That's what I want to do with the whole Lew's catalog. I want to go with Kevin Van Dam. I want to go with Mark Zona. I want to go with Andy Montgomery. I want to go with Greg Hackney. I want to go with all these guys that work for Lew's and tell me, okay, Andy Montgomery is just a machine at skipping a bait up under a boat dock. He's incredible. All right, Andy, what does it take? Why did you design this rod this way? And that's labeled medium heavy, but it doesn't have an explanation that this rod is really designed to have the right bend to load that rod to skip it under that dock. So this is the Andy Montgomery, what are we going to call this rod? Now, so if you are out there and you want to be able to skip a bait under a boat dock, this is the rod you need. Now it's labeled 6'6" medium heavy, but it's different from this other 6'6" medium heavy. So at the end of the information, I think everybody will see that there's no secret anymore in the way you build fishing rods. Everybody knows how to wrap the mandrels. Everybody has IM6. Everybody has IM8, and on and on and on. Everybody's got all the guides that are the same. They've got micro guides, mini guides, and everything in between. They've got carbide guides. They've got ceramic guides. They've got there's nothing that is a secret in the way of components or the way you wrap or build a rod. So who has got the best rod on the market? Well, some people get caught up because the price tag is higher. That's a better rod. Women are real bad at that. You know, if this pair of shoes costs $100, it's got to be better than this $50 pair.
Shoot, I mean sometimes those pair of shoes from Walmart do better than the high-end ones. Let's be real.
Ooh, we've hit a nerve here. But most of the time when you go shopping, you want that $100 pair. Come on.
Oh, obviously. Listen, you could set 3 pairs of shoes in front of me, not telling me anything about them, and the one that I pick out that I like is going to be the most expensive one out of the 3.
Well, but the price tag's not going to influence you?
It might. Maybe. It depends.
Yeah, well.
Depends on the brand.
If that's the case, you're the exception to most women that I know. If the one pair is $100, they're going to think it's a much better product than $50.
Yeah, sometimes.
Well, as bad as I hate to admit this, guys are no different. Most guys, if they look at a rod and it says $350, they think it's better than a $200 rod.
Right.
It's just a perception. Well, it's got to be better. It costs more. Well, that's not true. And so who should have the best fishing rods? Let's be honest. If all the components are the same, if there are no secrets in how to wrap a mandrel, to build a fishing rod, how to weave the graphite, if there's no secrets in that, which there isn't, you can reverse technology in today's world and you can figure out how anything's made. Who should have the best fishing rods? Well, I'm going to say Lew's. Lew's should have the best fishing rods in the world. Why? Here's why. Because they've got engineers that can build anything you want to build. They got the best anglers in the world. Look at their list of anglers. And they're all telling them, we need this rod. Again, it goes back to designing a lure. You used to design a lure because it looked good. Now the bass fisherman says, no. We need this in a 3-inch model and we need it to run 10 feet deep. That's the same thing as transpiring on these rods. No. We don't need that rod to load between the 4th and the 5th guide. We need that rod to load between the 3rd and 4th guide because Andy Montgomery, I'm skipping this thing up under this boat dock. So here's how I need this rod built. And so at the end of the run, Lou's should have, and in my opinion, do have, the best selection of fishing rods to serve the purpose of launching that tool to catch fish with.
Right.
So that is what has happened to professional bass fishermen. That is the influence that they've had in the marketplace. It started with lures, went down the fishing line, rods, reels, all the way down the line. So the whole method of madness for building lures, line, rods, reels, electronics, trolling motors, boats, motors, is based on the need of the professional bass fisherman. Now, you may never fish a bass tournament in your life, never have any interest in competitive fishing at all, but you benefit greatly when you buy a fishing lure. You benefit from that. I never would have ever played professional golf. Now, I don't golf anymore. Golf's for people that don't know how to hunt or fish. But when I golfed, I did a fair amount of both. I was either hunting my ball out of the woods or fishing it out of the water. I was a terrible golfer. But I did enjoy it, and I benefit from Jack Nicklaus. I benefited from Arnold Palmer and the way they design clubs and the input and the balls and the Bobby Watkins and the guys that played golf. I learned a lot because of what their input and how they influenced the industry. Same thing with baseball, same thing with football, the same thing with every sport we're involved in. Look at the running shoes today that we have based on professional track and field guys. So professional basketball players, look at the influence that they've had on designing shoes for comfort and to absorb shock and all the things. So in the world of fishing, professional bass fishing has had an impact that there's nothing else to compare what it's done to rearrange and design this sport and to be beneficial to everybody that fishes on, it doesn't matter what level. So the companies that jumped on board and went with bass, they grew market. The companies that elected to stay in the old mode and stay with the traditional market method of marketing and stay with outdoor riders, they went in the wrong direction. They lost market share. Some of them went away. Some of them lost everything. So I said I was going to circle back to this about Tom Bedell coming back with Berkeley and being a gunslinger. Tom could not get in and be the official line of the Bassmaster Classic. DuPont Stren had that sewed up. And so Tom couldn't get his feet in the door. He ran ads in the magazine. He did everything to contribute it. But Stren kept getting the lion's share, no pun intended, lion's share of marketing. And so Tom said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make it where the first place prize of the Bassmaster Classic is $50,000. I'm going to say the guy that wins the Classic with Berkeley Trilene is going to get a bonus of $50,000. Or $60,000, more than what the Classic was paying. Well, Ray said, whoa, we're not going to let that happen. So Ray made a rule. Now, one of the things you had to do to get that $50,000 from Berkeley, you had to wear a Trilene patch during the Classic. So Ray come back and said, okay, no one can wear a competitive patch. If Ranger's the sponsor, you cannot wear a Triton patch. You cannot wear a Nitro patch. You cannot wear a Tracker patch. Only a Ranger patch. If Mercury is the outboard sponsor, you can only wear a Mercury patch.
Yeah.
If DuPont Stren is the sponsor, you can only wear a Stren patch. No Trilene. Well, wait a minute. Hold on, Ray. We're all going to go broke because our livelihood is based on that sponsorship. Prize money was so insignificant. People talk about all the money bass fishermen win. When I won a tournament, it was $5,000 and a boat with no motor on it. That was it. And so I can't make a living doing that, man. I got kids, a mortgage, I got to pay for my car, and the expenses, travel. There's no way. So prize money is really insignificant. All that does is a little bonus money. You got to make a living off your sponsors. Well, now wait a minute. I'm going to the Super Bowl of bass fishing, where all the cameras are on, all the outdoor riders, and now I'm being told I cannot wear a patch to represent the company.
Your sponsor, yeah.
So, man, you're talking about controversy. That's worse than falling facing sonar. Ray called it a boycott. But this is a beautiful thing, really, when you stop and look at it. We were completely at odds. I mean, we were button heads. So Ray came back and said, look, guys, I don't care what you say or what you do. I'm not going to rescind that rule. And the rule is you cannot wear a patch that conflicts with our sponsors. Well, we can't do that, Ray. Well, I'm not rescinding the rule, so you make up your mind what you're going to do. Well, I know what I'm going to do. I'm not going to fish. I'm not going to show up. It's unfair to my sponsors. I'm not going to show up if I can't represent the companies that have paid my way to be there. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was a very strong conviction that I would be violating the companies that supported me if I show up. But I didn't know that anybody else felt like that. I had no idea anybody else felt like that. Yeah. And Ricky Clunn and Ray have always been tight. They've been buddies, real close buddies. So I get a call from Ricky. Hank, what you going to do about the patch rule? I said, Ricky, just between you and I'm not going to go. I'm going to. He said, that's pretty noble. He said, I'm with you. I said, okay. About 30 minutes later, I get a call from Jimmy Houston. Jimmy says, hey, Hank, what you going to do about not being able to wear your companies and represent them at the Classic? I said, I'm not going. Jimmy said, I'm not going either. Well, it wasn't long to almost everybody in the field. Jimmy Atkinson, he had no conflict in sponsors. Randy Fight, he had no conflict in sponsors. Denny Breyer, he had no conflict in sponsors. So those were the only 3 out of the 40 guys that qualified for the Classic that were going to go. The other 37 said, we're not going.
Wow, so they really said, we're packing up our bags and you're not going to have a Classic this year. How about that?
Well, so Ray says, okay, that's fine. If the 40th man, if the top 40 says we're not going to fish, we're going to go down to the 41st guy. Yeah. We're going to extend an invitation. We're going to have 40 fishermen at the Bassmaster Classic if we have to go down to 250th place. Wow. And so that was their stand. And I didn't really think they were ever going to retract that. They did. They did. And about 2 weeks before the Classic, they rescinded the rule and said, okay, you can come and wear your patch. At the meantime, Ray had talked to Tom Bedell and said, Tom, you cannot stink up the show. You can't offer these guys more money to wear a Berkeley patch than we're paying for first place. So you need to scale that down. So I think they had some kind of agreement among themselves that he wouldn't do that again. And so that controversy faded away. But that's the kind of stuff that took place with the introduction of professional organized bass fishermen under the banner Bass Angler Sportsman Society. And that is what took place in the way of marketing, lure design, rod design, reel design. Bassmaster Magazine once had an article in the magazine that had a demonstration of Bill Dance, who is notorious for bloopers. He was setting the hook on a plastic worm and the seat broke. And that was the caption of the article. The proper way to set the hook on a bass with a plastic worm is set so hard you break the seat.
Oh, man.
And we all thought that was absolutely the gospel. You know, you can't believe everything you read, but a lot of things are done with good intentions that just hadn't done enough research to realize. That's why, you know, one year they'll say it's bad to drink coffee. The medical journal will release it's bad to eat this, it's bad. And then a year later they come back and say, well, no, actually butter's better than margarine. So they're always changing because they discover things. Well, that's the case about the plastic worm. Bassmaster Magazine put out an article. The way you set the hook is you reel down, and with all the strength and all the might, with a stiff, they call them a worm rod, which was a heavy action rod, is with all your might, jump back, jerk back like you were going to break the boat seat. We all believe that was absolutely true. Well, Lou Childers, who was the most innovative guy that ever entered the industry, Lou Childers shows up with a scale that's waterproof, and he said, hey, you big old guys, how you set the hook? So we were all telling him how we set the hook, and he said, how many pounds of pressure do you think it takes to go and put a hook through a plastic worm into a bass's mouth? How many pounds do you think? Well, we didn't have a clue. Not anybody had a clue from a scientific standpoint. We just all speculated. I said, I think it takes about 15 pounds. And he said, how about you, Ricky, talking to Ricky Green? I think it takes about, well, I know I do it with 8-pound test line sometimes, so I think it takes about 7 pounds. So everybody was speculating on how many pounds of pressure it took to go through a plastic worm and get a positive hookup on a bass. Well, it took 4.5 pounds. Lou had scientifically done enough tests to document it takes between 4 and 4.5 pounds. So then he said, okay, when you cast out there 40 feet away and you do that big giant hook set, how many pounds of pressure do you think you're putting on that end of that rod where that hook is, the end of that line? Oh, I don't know, probably 12 pounds. You think so? Okay. Well, you're a big old strong man. Yeah, you think so. Well, let's find out.
Yeah.
Let's find out. Well, the only way to know is let's put that scale, we was at a swimming pool. He said, let's put that scale at the bottom of the swimming pool, anchor it down, and you stand up here, we'll mark it off. This pool's 50 feet long. We'll mark it off at 60 feet. You sit in this chair and you give me that hook set, and as strong as you are, let's see how many pounds of pressure you could generate. Man, I tried to break the rod. I was sitting on a chair at the swimming pool. I was trying to break that chair. I was giving it everything I had, and I was putting in there about 5 to 6, sometimes 7 pounds of pressure. He said, wow. So then they got some other big old guys, Billy Westmoreland, some other guys set the hook, and it was all about the same.
About the same, yeah.
So then Lou said, okay, let me show you how I set the hook. It was almost like cracking a whip. He'd go, shoo. He said, it's all done by speed. That's why everything Lou's had was called speed, speed spool, speed stick, speed hook. Everything was about speed. He said, here's how I set the hook. He said, I don't break the boat seat. I don't break my wrist. I don't break the fishing rod. I crack a whip because I can generate more speed. If I feed it just a little bit of line and whip it, I can generate a whole lot more speed than you can just dragging and pulling as hard as you can. So Lou sat up there, and with very little effort, he looked like completely effortless. He would set that hook and he'd generate 11 pounds. 12 pounds, and we out there breaking our backs, big old strong guys, young, reeling down, jerking as hard as we can, and we're generating 7 at tops.
That's my problem whenever I fish, is I want to set the hook like it's a 20-pound bass, and then here comes this little 3-pound bass come flying out the water when you yank that sucker.
Well, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. You're not leaving anything left on the table. You're giving it all the energy. But it's all about speed. So we learned that. Had it not been for professional fishing, that would have never been known. Right. Had it not been for professional fishermen, there would have never been an understanding from a national level. Everything would have been regional. There would have been no national understanding of lure design. There's so much more happened as a result of Davey Height, who's from Prosperity, Lake Murray, South Carolina, who's going to Thousand Island, New York, and then going to Sam Rayburn, Texas, and then going to Ouachita, Arkansas, and then going to Albemarle Sound, North Carolina, there's no understanding what a guy like that needs for all these different situations. So all he would have the knowledge of, had it not been professional fishing, is what happens in his region of the country. He'd never know. I worked for Bill Norman, and Bill Norman, all his crankbaits had painted lips. Well, in the southeast where I live, people don't want a painted lip crankbait. It makes that crankbait appear to be twice as big. The whole length of the bill is a part of the bait. It was just too big. And it was hard for me to explain to Bill that in the southeast you had to have a clear bill crankbait. Well, he came out with a reflect in, a little in a reflect. So it ended up, because of the material, it had a clear bill. So I had them all custom painted. I had them painted the colors of his lures. And I started winning tournaments. I won 3 tournaments on them.
Wow.
And he saw the impact and the demand. People were writing letters. Hey, I want that crankbait, that Tennessee Shad clear bill. I can't. Well, we don't make that. Hank had that hand painted. Well, you need to make it. Well, it didn't take him long. He realized, hey, that came from professional fishing. Otherwise, he would have never known that. Otherwise, that little end would never have been available to the public with clear bill.
Right. Well, you sell those now in your bait
Oh, yeah.
shop. Yeah.
Yeah, they're everywhere. But that's what it takes, and that's what it took, and that's how it all came about. And so people say, well, I think competitive fishing gets in the way of local fishing. I don't like tournaments. I'm sick of tournaments. And let me tell you this. I understand that firsthand. I understand that. There are a lot of tournaments. And there are a lot of tournament guys that feel that they are privileged and that they should have precedence over local anglers. That's not right. On the other hand, if you can, cut them some slack. They'll be gone in 2 or 3 days. The problem is now there's so many tournaments. I mean, there's a high school event, there's a collegiate event, there is a major league fishing event, there's a bass event. There's something going on all the time, so it's tournament after tournament after tournament after tournament. I understand your frustrations, I do. And professional fishermen need to give the same respect to that local angler as he gives the other professional anglers. If he's there first, don't interfere with him. Don't infringe and fail to be a good sportsman. And everybody needs to ask themselves, what would I want that guy to do to me? If I'm fishing a boat dock, do I want somebody to pull in on the other side? No, you don't. You don't want that. So don't do that to them. Treat that local angler just like. And I think as I talk about the influence of bass fishing and I talk about the positive, there is some negative. And there are a lot of tournaments today, and we need to be conscientious of guys that are not in tournaments. They have just as much right to stake their claim as you have. So cut them slack. Don't try to bully them, or don't cut in. Don't get on the other side of the boat dock. You don't want them to do it to you, therefore don't do it to them. Right. And we'll all get along better. But to that local angler that's fed up, you would never have what you have today in the way of rods, reels, line, lures, technical developments, electronics, trolling motors, all the way down the line. You would never have that had it not been for the sport of professional fishermen. They have refined, developed, and made contribution that is unparalleled to anything that would have ever happened.
Absolutely.
And it's still happening. Mm-hmm. Look at all the advancement, all the stuff and the technical advancements. I mean, I look at a fishing rod that I used in 1976, and I can't believe I used that rod. That thing weighs 3 or 4 times what my rod weighs.
Right.
And a fish about got to jerk it out of my hand for me to feel him. How in the world we use that equipment and competed is unbelievable.
You found a way, though.
And the reels are like a chunk of lead. I mean, you're talking about a mass of weight and fatigue and insensitive. I don't know how I cast them things. You know, I used to cast one of those cypress trees at Santee Cooper with those rods. It's amazing to me. It makes me think I was somebody. I don't know how you do that. But the technical advancements have been created through need, and that is by the professional anglers. So it's amazing how that's come around. And the companies that parallel with bass, the companies like Jim Bagley, the companies like DuPont Stren, Burke Lure Company, Burke Bedell with Berkeley, and I know his name, Bing McCullum with the Burke Lure Company. Bing recognized the value, Jim Bagley recognized the value. The guys over at Stembridge from East Point, Georgia, with the flip-tail worm, they recognized the value. And Cream Lure Company, you know, I learned at the Bassmaster Classic, Cream was a company that worked with John Powell, some, I believe, and I said, man, it's good to see you guys here. I didn't know y'all were back in business. He said, we've never been out of business.
Oh, wow.
We've never stopped making cream lures. We've made cream lures ever since we started them in 1958 or whenever it was.
Wow.
We've never stopped. So that's pretty amazing. I learned that. I didn't know that. So the ones that coattailed with the professional angler, with bass, and was a part of it, they prospered. The companies that tried to stick with the old methodology of working with outdoor riders, they went by the wayside. So it's pretty interesting to look at the history of the sport, as we talked about last week on Independence Day, the history of the sport itself and the foundation that was built on the personalities. But then you come around this week and you look at the companies that fell by the wayside, and I could go down a long list of companies that are not in existence today, and they didn't want to team up with bass. And then you look at the companies that have prospered and grown, and how many more companies have got involved because of professional fishermen's influence on lure design, rod design, reel design, boat design. It's amazing where we are today, and it's a result of the positive side of professional fishing. And we need to keep that going. We need to continue to innovate. Fish, John Powell, the Hall of Famer John Powell, when Ray Scott decided, man, this is not right, killing all these bass. Every time we have a bass tournament, they would have them all piled up and put them on ice and give them to the Boy Scouts or different communities, leaders for Feed the Hungry. Worthy cause, but it was a very tough thing to look at, is all these 5 and 6 pound fish in an ice chest all dead. And Ray said, we're going to do catch and release. And John Powell, great late Hall of Famer, said, it will be a great thing for the sport, but it's going to create a real challenge to the angler, because once you catch these fish, release them, catch them, release them, catch them, and release them, about 4 or 5 times, they're going to figure out the game. And they're going to be harder and harder and harder to catch. So we're going to have to adapt. We're going to have to figure out new techniques. We're going to have to constantly create new fishing lures, new methods, new techniques, or these fish are going to outsmart us, because we're going to educate them, release them, educate them. They said by the time they get to be 5 pounds, they're going to have a master's degree in fishing lures.
Yeah.
And that was pretty brilliant on the part of John Powell. So the innovation of bass fishing in the world of outdoor products has been a great contribution.
Right. I'll say make sure you check out Huckleberry Apparel in the description below, and the links to the high school fishing forums are also there.
Now, have you told them bye?
I'll say bye now.
Thank you so much.
See you guys next week.
See you next week, and God bless you. I'll see you next week as well. Thanks for watching. I sure do appreciate it, and any input, write us a note. Anything you want to hear in the way of question and answers. As Sarah Beth said, check out Huckleberry Apparel. And again, God bless you. See you next week.